Oh, right then. So, hello everyone. Let's see if this is working. Now, is that working? Finally! Hello! Is it working? There's always a possibility, isn't it? Did you meet the deadline? Definitely. Close to the deadline. Close to the deadline. I've got a bit of an extension for today, so to finish off on a bit. Although I haven't asked for it, they just haven't sent me an email requesting it. So hopefully that'll all be in. Right then. So it's been a fun. It's been a fun day. It's been a very fun day. Sorry, I've been walking dog and sorting out all sorts of things. Afternoon, blue shirt butter. Can Texas get a nuclear memorial ship? Oh, we can hope not. I think Texas access to a nuclear warship, a powered warship, is probably, well, everything's bigger in Texas, so HMS Mass is either what they'd be working for. Rackshaw, having your main armament rusted in place, decking maintenance to new level. Yeah, that is Angels. Someone very kindly did send me a full video which I could watch, which would teach me how to pronounce it. And yeah. All right, that was my attempt at answering English badly. So, hello everyone. Hopefully, the sound is better. Intermittent. Ooh. Giving problems in comprehension. Yes. How is that? Is that better? How's that doing for sound? No sound to bound sound. I can't lip read. Sorry, Mike. Better. Much better. I'm hoping it is definitely better because the trick was my headset was on and I'd forgotten. A Bluetooth headset. It connects to everything. We can hear you now, nice and clear. That's good. That is much better. I like hearing it. That went much better. I like hearing that it's got sound. That is better. Yes. Sorry, I forgot to turn the headset off. I've been playing around with the with the recording mic and the thing on the computer, and have found that the camera I use, which is the phone one, the feed arrives at the video about up to 5 seconds behind, somewhere between 1 and 5 seconds behind sometimes what the mic's getting in. So I've had to put in a delay to the volume. It's gonna be fun. So why did Rodney leak? Well, why did Rodney leak? That is a very, very good question. Rodney has been... HMS Rodney is a ship which had a lot of hard knocks in life. Turning 343. Last presentation was perfect, though. I've had a couple of reports saying it wasn't, so that's what I was going for. But we'll work it out. Right. So, Rodney had a very, very hard life. You see, Nelson was always the preferred child in many, many ways, and gets a lot more luster because she's named after Admiral Nelson, so she gets a lot more love that way. But also, Rodney's deployments tend to be the slightly less prestigious, slightly harder seas ones. It wears on her. And her refits are that much behind Nelson, so they're that much extended. Whereas Nelson goes in for a refit just prior to World War II, really. Rodney's scheduled refit was scheduled to be during World War II at the beginning, and then it was put back to 1944 to be done in America, and by that point they were going, this ship just ain't worth doing. So Rodney was very useful because of her 16-inch guns, but she wasn't really considered that great by the end. Higher RAF4. Right. So, Killer Binful. Dr. Clark, USN Yard refit question. Do you have any details on Rodney's engine refit that got cancelled due to Bismarck? Well, it was going to be a full refit like had been done to Warspite and Queen Elizabeth in the UK. So she was going to have the full refit of engines, the full refit of... Basically, she was going to be gutted and rebuilt. But, hello Karl von Gansberg, half noon to Hungary. Now, could a US Yard have done Hood's large repair? Honestly, they probably would have done her large refit. In fact, honestly, if Hood had been sent in for refit, if they had decided, hang on, we're going to continue this as scheduled, Hood would have been sent there. And Ian Carr is quite right. Rodney's war record is far more impressive than Nelson, but the trouble is, as a ship, she doesn't get the maintenance. Nelson gets used... Hi, Eric. Nelson gets used as a flagship and as many other things, so that sort of means she gets the status. It's kind of like Warspite and Queen Elizabeth versus the rest of the Queen Elizabeth class. If you have to ask a question, which of these ships is going to get a refit? It will normally be Warspite. If it's not Warspite, it'll be Queen Elizabeth. Literally, those two get a vast majority of refits. And the reason is because they've had the major engine refits in the interwar years. So they are as close as you can get to brand new ships. Because when you're replacing all the boilers, and I have a list here from Warspite, which gives a good idea of what they do. Skip past it, there she is. So, the refit between 34 to 37 for Warspite. Propulsion. They replaced all her propulsion machinery and gave her 6 new individual boiler rooms, each with an Admiralty 3-drum boiler, in place of the 24 Yarrow boilers. They put in new geared Parsons turbines to the 4 engine rooms and gearing rooms. They added in lighter machinery to various facilities to try and rework the equipment movement. So You know, they managed to save 1,500 tons in weight saving on light machinery such as the systems used to move turrets and these sort of things, that all managed to, those tonnage then gets put back into the armour. But it means she's got 80,000 brake horsepower now, ship horsepower, when she used to have a lot less, for actually a ship which is not much more heavier. They added in about another 1,100 tons of armour, including coverage forward of A turrets, boiler rooms, increase of 5 inches of magazine. So basically the ship's made a lot more survivable. Warspite has a massive reconstruction. And while she loses her torpedoes, the original 15-inch turrets were upgraded to increase elevation on the guns by 10 degrees, from 20 degrees to 30 degrees, providing a further 9,000 yards of range to a maximum of 32,300 yards with a standard shell. The fire control's also modernised, and they add in swordfish float planes and walrus flying boats and all the hangar facilities for them and all sorts of things. Tripod mast is removed and the armoured citadel is built up and all these things. It's a massive reconstruction, and they do the same on Queen Elizabeth. They do the same, I think, on Barham. They did the same on Nelson. Rodney was Judas. This is a massive reconstruction job to fix it. Right, so let's go through the questions. Hello, new subscriber. Sorry, the chat means I can't see who you are, but thank you for subscribing. Danny Freeman, I'm afraid I haven't had a chance to watch your intro vid. But was anything really left from some of these refits? Would it not have been easier, cheaper to build new? It's a debate as to whether it would be easier, cheaper to build new. The thing is, you've got the hull. You've got so much of the ship is retained. It actually is, in a way, cheaper to carry on. And also, it's cheaper in a way that, how do I put this? To refit and change a ship round requires less advanced dock facilities than to build a ship from scratch. So if you have fewer or you're shorter of manpower, especially skilled manpower when it comes to ships, actually doing a refit way and doing it that to the style actually is safer. Okay. Right, so that was answered down in Freeman. Kilburn. So Rodney would have had her 6-inch secondary swap for 4.5s or 5.25s. 4.5s probably. Probably 4.5s. Yes. New IKB 4472. Talking of refitting ships, how long would it take for the Germans to refit the Scharnhorst with 15-inch guns? A long time. We're probably talking about... Well, because you aren't just changing the guns. The guns will change the turrets, the machinery in the turrets. You'll need to change the hoist system for the new shells. You have to change... You're pretty much probably talking about 6 months. So, yeah, in the nicest way, it's not going to be a quick or a cheap job. Turning 343, I don't know Freeman time. You can refit in 12 to 18 months. It takes you 3 to 5 years to build from scratch. Can take you 3 years to do a massive rebuild. The rebuilds in World War II were sometimes massive, but they were usually slightly quicker than that, but they could still be quite long. Mike Owen, when did US yards start working on our own ships? 1940 was when the ships started really going out there. You really start having them start to appear. Illustrious isn't the first, but she's certainly one of the first to end up out there. And she's out there in 1941. It's all Lend-Lease and various other things that are done beforehand. Turning 343, still very expensive, but you get it on time. Yeah, pretty much. Majestic Feet 1. I ordered Iron Brew on recommendations of Clark and Drac. Pretty penny to get here, so California, hope it's worth it. It will be worth it. Just don't drink 20 litres in one weekend. Danny Freeman, turning 343, yeah. Thank you. It's because it takes time to make armour, or because you knew they were upgrading so could prepare. Partially because if you know you're upgrading, you can prepare, and you can prepare the things offset design so you know where everything is. But it does take time to make armor. And one of the interesting examples I have is Formidable out in Australia when she's having a refit. They can't use armor plate. They have to use fancy steel, basically. It's good quality steel, but it's not armor plate. Ian Carr, Nelson was also good at collecting torpedoes. That she was. She was good at collecting torpedoes. Killbuffle, Valiant got the full QE rebuild. Yes, she did. Well, she does get the full QE rebuild, but she has an issue with her propellers. She seems to have problems with her screws a whole way through her life. Jimac, at Dusty question about carrier groups during refits. I suppose that there was occasion for large crew reshuffle, but what about FAA? Left for use on other ships or trained in USA? They would, if they're in the UK, they'd probably go and start training from one of the Royal Naval Air Stations. They'd also be involved maybe in launching airstrikes from the land on various Navy targets or reinforcing the RAF in terms of fighter defence. There are lots of things they can get into. They can also go to the USA for further training if they want to do that, but honestly, they're usually transferred to other carriers. Usually the air groups just get moved around. If they're if they're in Sydney, they get to go have some fun in Australia. Usually. Hi Ian. Turning 3 for free. I was here at 0.44k on Star Wars. Come on. New builds equals Vanguard, right? Yep, Vanguard is the new build. It's fun times. Stuart Crow. War Sprite refit costs about a third of building a KGV. Yes. Although I'm not quite sure about the War Sprite refit costs, because Wikipedia has 2.36 million. I've seen stats estimating at 2.4, and I would say myself that I'm reckoning it came in about 2.5, at least, because of various things they don't include in the costs. Because you see, the costs are only for the labour they have to employ. They don't include the costs of the sailors and the crew doing jobs like painting the ship and all sorts of things. Alright. Stuart Crow, King's Rook, you're not that late. Bailey Imora, what was done to Royal Oak more specifically in her rebuild into war compared to the QEs and Revenge class? Not a lot. Okay, so if the QEs get the full-on rebuilds, the R class get the R class basically get what's bare minimum. They get better protection for their underwater, for their torpedo defenses and all these things. What you realise very quickly when you're looking into it is that the plan was that the KGVs would replace the R class, and the Queen Elizabeths would keep going, and that was how it was going to be. It wasn't going to be anything more. They weren't. Let's put it this way. The advantage that the Queen Elizabeth always had was they were the better platform to begin with because they had the more powerful engines. But they had the engines which were by and away the far more risky setup for the British to pursue, which is why they go back to the R class, because they are coal powered and all sorts of things, so they're safer for for Britain from a strategic security perspective in terms of supply of energy. But it does mean they're permanently at a back foot compared to their older sisters. Okay. Daniel Freeman, thank you for the answer. Jack Ray, is refit easier as well due to not having to shake down crews along for new ships? I noticed the current shakedown crews are rather long years. Yes, to an extent they are, because often quite a lot of the crew continue over, so they have a lot of experienced crew in there and they can get it to work. But they can also take a while too, and if you can, Illustrious and Formidable on their post-refit shakedown cruise decide to have a kiss. Just doesn't work out well for them. Doesn't work out well at all. They need a minor refit after that to get over the refit. Paladja, did RN ships have plans and blueprints with them for refits in foreign dockyards, or did Captain just verbally explain to Foreman what needs to be done? The director of naval construction would send plans and would get everything to them. These things were all sorted out well in advance. Jerison, what do the rules of war say about repair refit in a neutral country? Ooh. As anyone who's watched the video on the Grass Bay will learn, that is technically not supposed to happen. So, technically, it's not supposed to happen. But, these things are being done for various reasons, so they are. It's not technically, though, supposed to happen. But they managed to find a workaround. I think the basis is what HMS Glasgow gets up to in Brazil in World War I. It has fun. Jerison, at 25:29 in your earlier video, you mentioned there was no casualties on HMS Nelson, but you forgot about the ruination of the officer's cheese being hidden in the torpedo room. I do not include cheese as a casualty. As much as I love cheese, cheese is not a casualty. Cheese is a incidental loss. Sorry, someone keeps WhatsApping me, so I'm going to have to mute them. Okay. Better? Apologies about that. Sorry. So the WhatsApp kept flashing up, and so I had to mute it. It's someone I hadn't bothered to mute because they haven't actually contacted me in about 4 months, so I didn't think I needed to. But, you know, sod's law. Tony Penfold, when the ships were refitted in the US, were they refitted with US equipment or UK equipment? If US, were there major integration issues? Yes, there were major integration issues. They were often refitted with US equipment. And it had a habit of getting anglicised. It would either be anglicised by the crew themselves, or it would be anglicised in a refit in the UK. This is why Illustrious, from memory, her refits go Alexandria emergency repairs, Durban for better repairs, Norfolk, Virginia for full repairs, and then to Rosyth, I think, or was it? No, Cameleds on the Mersey to get anglicised again. It works. Are there any other history channels that you can recommend? Drax sent me here from Osprey28. Well, I'm going to have to say for that generous offer, it's very generous super chat. I have to. Armoured Carriers. Jamie's account is always very good, and he does do a lot of things there, and there are a couple of others. I've got them listed. I'm subscribed to them that I can recommend quite quickly on that one. Daddly-dee. Save the Royal Navy is pretty good, and I've got someone, and Battlefleet Studios. They are pretty fun as well. They are the ones I have going on a bit at the moment, and I have a couple of others who I go and visit quite regularly, but those are the ones I'd recommend. Right, back to questions. Seriously, Padgett, a moment of silence for the cheese? A moment of silence for the cheese. Yeah, it deserves it. Salute to the cheese. See, Mike, Lexington, Saratoga, Normandy, and a certain USN old BBs use turbo-electric drive. Pros and cons, and did Brits have any vessels? The Brits did look at it. Turbo-electric drive has advantages in terms of gearing and in terms of how you can generate your power and get your power out. But it's not yet reaching the point at which it's getting reliable. It's still experimental. So for the British, they were already experimenting quite heavily by going for oil-fired with Queen Elizabeth's, and you go with what you know to an extent. You always go with what you know. Jeff Beeler, was HMS Delhi's conversion to being a slow armoured Fletcher worth it? I'm going to leave that one because I'm going to do a whole video about the D-class cruisers and what they do. And frankly, some of them are worth it, some of them aren't. But I'm going to get into it because the D-class do have an interesting career. And rather like the C-class, who I've already done a video on, they do deserve a bit of a chat. And that will get an introduction and a chatty video as well. Kilbinful, given the speed and effectiveness of the USN standard rebuilds, could the US have completed one of the RN rebuilds faster? No. Let's just wait. The US tried to complete the RN rebuilds as quickly as they could. They couldn't complete them any faster than they did. Mainly they could do this with the standard rebuilds because they were very common and hadn't been perhaps as played around with as much during the interwar years, whereas the Royal Navy had been upgrading. And if you consider, by the time you get to World War II, Renown and Repulse are quite different ships in many regards. Random. In Carr, there were plenty of 15-inch turrets, including spares, which I assume were originally of similar construction to allow an upgraded product line. Upgraded production. Technically, but it's not as easy as you might think. A 15-inch turret is, in many ways, turrets are very, very customized for their battleships. They have to be, to an extent, and it's very much a lot of work with them. Danny Freeman, the HMS Hood website reckons 4.5 million from the estimate made in 1939 to do the big rebuild for her, although they plan to defer until 1942. Yeah, they do reckon 4.5 million. But that's to turn her into a fast battleship and do all sorts of rework on her subdivision on the inside. I'm not sure if they'd actually do that. You can hope they would, but I don't think they actually would. Daniel Freeman, the HMS Hood... Kevin McQuarrie, but weren't the R-Class converted to oil well before World War II? Okay, so the R-Class are converted to oil in so much as it's the basic conversion. Okay, so they start off as coal, then they have a rather similar line to the Congos, I think, at one point, and then they go to oil. But it's a conversion, whereas, and it makes life interesting. I've got the actual details written on here somewhere. Literally, it's one of these picture slides in front of me. No. They were basically converted on stocks as they were being built to being R-Class, to being oil-powered, but it was never really... Okay, they started off being very much designed around coal and going to use coal for a lot of their extra armour and all sorts of things. So coal's quite good as armour material. Then they're converted to oil, and they're converted to oil quickly under the pressures of war approaching. And they don't do as good a job. The R-Class are not... Sounds terrible. But they are the battleships which are actually best when turned into renown and repulse rather than as battleships, in my opinion, but that gets me into trouble. Right, get back to my lovely large chat so I can see all the messages. Sean Mack, Kilberful, likely not. The engine was ruined, the guns were simply ruined, and you just had to do... Yeah, pretty much. That's mostly why you do send a big refit. J-Muff, the Queen Elizabeths were bigger, whilst the R-Class were really 15-inch versions of the Iron Dukes, which were really too small for the needs of the RN. That, to an extent as well. As time goes on, the RN needs bigger ships, especially when you're going around the world, and you have to take a lot of stuff with you. Jeff Beeler, Victoria-era navies rebuilt many of their ships in one RN class. It states it starts with wooden sailing, a three-decker, and ends with a wooden steam ironclad. HMS Royal Oak with three turret. Interesting. Gemma, if you make the rules, you can bend them? Yeah, pretty much. Greg Sowski, Captain Bligans of Jesus. Oh, God, yeah. Yes, I know. I remember the movie too. Then at Greg Sadowski, so did Samuel Pepys, and he was involved in building the RN. The behaviour was also quite a lot like Nelson's with the ladies. Yes, and they all liked cheese. Cheese is becoming a big thing today. I should so have mentioned the cheese on HMS Nelson, shouldn't I? This would have solved a lot of these questions. Sean Mack, if the damage was less extensive, it's possible to do it quicker than the damage basically left the hulk of the ship. Yeah. And that's the thing. When you've got the ships being sent out to America, they're often the ships which have had the most damage. They're often the ships which, frankly, are damaged to the extent that it's going to be a problem to fix them in a British yard. They're going to be there for quite a long time. And can we better use that yard for other things and take up American yard space because they've got oodles? And honestly, if they're prepared to let it slow down their production, we don't mind. It saves our production lines. See, Mike, did the Brits do the complete 40mm changeover? And if so, did they do it in the UK or the US? Mostly they did it in the UK, but they did also in Australia. They did it in Bombay. They did it in Durban. They did it in America. Wherever it was, the shit was there and it needed the upgrade. It had the upgrade. That was basically their policy of the 40mm. Sure, Mac. Osprey 28. Mudmare does really good battle vids, but he hasn't posted anything in forever. Yeah, I would agree that. That's why I wasn't sort of going to mention him. Grace Sassy, it's Sean Mac. Did he ever do... The way I've seen it's Montemare. Let's go down. King's Rook, and I'm finally caught up. That's good. Hello, King's Rook. Danny Fring, converting coal to oil, give the stokers spoons? You have to do a lot of work to that. Also, there were some ships which were, remember, a transition. They were coal-fired, oil-sprayed. So they had a combined coal-oil. The Congos were a good example of this. And then they were turned to full oil to get them at extra speed. That's why people say they continue to be battle cruisers. But no, fast battleships, those things. They put in so much subdivision in them. James, the R-Class suffered from having half the power of the Q and Queen Elizabeth. Yep, and the rest, because they often had... The R-Class had a lot of issues with their propeller shafts, and no one's ever quite sure about it, but basically, one of them, they thought the only way to really fix it and get the propeller shaft proper would be to take it apart and put in a new propeller shaft, and that's a very expensive, very difficult job, especially on a ship which is armoured and designed not to be taken apart. There is the whole debate going over what type of cheese was it. I think it was cheddar, but I wouldn't like to say. I'm tempted to say it was cheddar, but I don't know where I've got that from. King's Rook, at least the cheese was being eaten rather than being used as ammo for the cannons. Depends how long it'll be left for. Good evening, Domea. Donna Fritz, why is it that the American ships look like some threw up 20mm, 4mm all those ships? Other nations' ships look clean, but American ships look like they're floating guns. So do most of the Royal Navy ships in World War II. It's a symptom of AA, and you can never have enough. And it's only after World War II, when you have time to sit back and go, so what was really effective and what really helped and what do we really need to maintain, that you find that a lot of the light guns get rid of and a lot of the 40mm get retained. And then the world carries on, and then we have missiles come in, so you don't need guns anymore. Then we finally do need guns, and they start off with the smallest guns you can get, and now we're getting back to the 40mm and the 57mm again. Or rather, we're getting back to the 40mm and the 3 inches again. Well, that's what I was heading in the direction of. Daniel Freeman at Ken Maguire. Don't know about the cheese. British cheese changed completely in World War II, and we are only rediscovering the older types apart from one or two like Stilton and cheddar. And cheddar was always popular in the Navy because it could last for freaking ever. Seeing like big wheel cheeses were Roman Legion rations. I would hope no one actually really roll a cheese along. I'm sure that's what you had wagons and other things for. Why you built roads. Rolling a cheese along the round seems terrible. New guy KB4472. Was converting a ship to oil just a case of sticking in an oil nozzle in the hole the coal went in? No. And this is the thing. Even though the R-Class were converted as they were under construction, it was still a complicated process to convert them, because where are you going to store the oil? How will you feed the oil to the boilers? How are you going to position the boilers? How are you going to... It's all complicated. It's doable, though, but it's complicated. Steam White, short shafts are another advantage of turbo electric, if you've got it reliable. Ken Maguire, I did hear at the beginning of the 20th century the RN did a lot of what would later be called high-low split. QE was high, R was cheap way of getting capability. Yeah, odds are. And odds are the next class after the R's, if they had managed to build them, were looking fairly high. So there would have been more of them if they built more after the R's, really. They then build Nelson and Rodney and a Hood. Yeah. Battle cruisers and ships which are... They're imagined by Winston Churchill and Nelson Rodney's case to be the huge bastions of naval might which would anchor the battle lines in future wars. And you're sort of looking and going, well, I hope they're not, because they've both got no guns on the back. So if they're anchoring your stern of your battle line, then it's got nothing to cover the rear. So basically, both these ones have to be on the front, which means your stern is probably going to be R-Class. And you're going to have your Queen Elizabeths constantly being kept slow because they're going to be behind them. So, you know, in the end, you're going to end up with Nelson and Rodney sitting in the middle of your firing line, Queen Elizabeth in front, probably racing away from it, R-Class behind, probably falling back from it, and them plodding along. That doesn't sound like that good a battle line to me. But, you know, that's me just being sarcastic. King's Rock, Carl van Gausberg. Tell that to Brazilians in their one battle with the Portuguese where cheese was used in place. Oh, good. Yeah. But, you know, if it works, it works. If the cheese works as a weapon, use the cheese as a weapon. Jeff Beard, Nightingale was in the middle of a 15-inch upgrade at the end of World War II. Hull had been separated and lengthened for bigger turrets. Yeah, I don't think Nightingale was ever actually going to be completed. Especially not after Hitler decided his decisions. She might have been, but it would have taken a long time, and it was taking a long time for her. Ian Carr, were any RN or USN ships coal-fired by World War II? Yes, but don't ask me to remember which ones. but I know they were still calling ship in some cases. They were mainly older things, and most have been averted, but there were still some wandering around which were coal-fired. Sean Mack, they would have been a battlecruiser with heavy armour. I'm not sure which one you're talking about, but Sean Mack on that one? I'm not sure where that comes from. Kingsford, Carl. Ooh, Uruguay, not Portugal, versus Brazil for the cheese battle, according to King's Rook. Things heating up. Daniel Freeman, you don't have to be so sad about Hood, Nelson, Rodney being all we got after QEs. At least something was bought. Yeah, I'm not sad. We just could have done so much better. And don't get... it's like, I'm not sad about the King George V. If you give them a 15-inch gun, they'd be an excellent blooming battleship. As it were, they were very good. But give them 15-inch, they'd have been brilliant. Kevin Guy, and that is the biggest defense I've heard for the US standards. Yeah. They were not mucked around with much during the interwar years. How did navies plan around balancing the number of DDs to capital ships cruisers? Did they try to aim for 6 to 8 per capital ship? No, because honestly they would always need more than the capital ships and then just for the capital ships and the carriers and all the other ships. So it's gonna sound strange, but pretty much they worked out, okay, we'll need about 4 flotillas for the Mediterranean, we'll need 4 for the home fleet, we'll need some for this and some for that. Usually if you have a carrier or a battleship wandering around, they will have what's called a division with them of destroyers, not a flotilla. A division is half a flotilla, so each flotilla is made up of 2 divisions. So let's say you're talking about 10th flotilla, they're made up of 19th and 20th divisions. And if you're talking about the Battle of Ile-de-Bats, the 19th division, which is entirely composed of Royal Navy and Royal Canadian Navy tribals, goes in and does a lot of killing. The 20th division, which is led by a Polish officer who is very decorated, very nice, but not as experienced sea officer as the flotilla leader, manages to lose their contacts. Much to the annoyance of HMS Eskimo, which is in that particular division going, I hate you all, you lost me my kill. It happened. Right then. So, Texas was always working on coal. Might have had oil sprinkler system by the end of World War II. Can't be sure about it. I think Texas did have pager. Did have the oil sprinkler system. Teddy Pedal. Edam is my cheese weapon of choice. Red Leicester, nothing less. IKB 4472. Did oil firing make it faster race seam from cold? Yes, in theory. However, and this is a small problem, if you get water in your lines or anything like that, that can cause a huge trouble with getting oil into it, so that can cause issues. So you have to be quite careful and maintain them quite properly. Oil is a more finicky, slightly less robust system than coal. Bad Home. Would the RN have been better off had they skipped the Nelson class and gone for modern ships with 15-inch provided that treaties allowed it? I can understand why they went for the Nelsons. They were as big as they could get on the treaty. But I think it might well have been better to standardise on the 15 inches. And I think with 15-inch guns, they could have got a far more conventional design than what they got with the 16 inches, because everything is just that bit lighter. Jerison, aside from HMS Valiant, were there any other ships so badly damaged that they were beyond economic feasible repair? oh. Um, there were a fair few. Resolution, or Archangel, when she got back, for starters. Sorry, I think I've angled that again. Someone did send me Royal Sovereign or Archangel and Resolution. Both are interesting. There is a reason Resolution is technically returns in September 1944 to Britain for refit, and then in October she's reduced reserves, and then she's put into a training establishment. There's also a few other ships like that. Basically, nah. Okay. King's Rook, that was okay. Daniel Freeman, Nelson class just needed about twice the engines. They needed a lot more than twice the engines. They needed to be reconfigured a bit. Donna Fritz, when they added the extra AA gun mounts, where do they store the extra ammo? Do they have designated areas or more if it fits in ships? Pardon me. Well, so this is part of the problem on HMS Hood, and why my suspicion of why she ends up getting sunk is because of a shell coasting on the water and hitting where her 4-inch ammunition is stored. Because when they stick it in, and it's stuck in around the ship and they've got new magazines, sometimes these magazines go in outside the existing protection. And so this is why I think Hood gets blown up by a 4-inch magazine going hot. Basically, they need to be stuck. They need to be put in everywhere, and you need to either redesignate existing magazines or build new ones, and it causes fun. Turning 3 for 3. Wasn't Nelson class that bad? They weren't that bad. I just think that there were better options. They were good ships themselves. Thank you, Perry. Gesundheit, Dr. Clark. They just weren't. They just weren't what they really needed. Daniel Freeman, Dr. Clark, do you need more iron brew? I'm being very good. I've drunk enough over the weekend. I am taking a couple of days off iron brew for my system. I'm being nice. There is only so much caffeine and various other things you should drink in about 72 to 96 hours. And I think I probably surpassed it, but I did manage to get the vast majority of my writing done. James, the Vanguard was what the KG5s should have been. Yeah, to an extent. To an extent, although I'd have probably gone with triple turrets the whole way around. But, you know, that's just me. I like the extra guns. Stefan Pajung. Palcha, USS Texas was cold fired with oil spray. Yay, thank you for confirming that. I did think she was. Schulmack, were very compromised design, but compatible with competitive with its counterparts. Yeah, that's Nelson and Rodney summed up. Yes, I'm not drinking iron brew today at King's Rook. I drank about 20 litres over the weekend. Seymour, do you think the increased AA storage needed weakened protection and caused Arizona and the Hood loss? Evidence suggests Amazon's AA ammo set off the next to the turret mag. That is the problem. You're shoving in extra ammunition storage. This can cause issues. Where do you put it? How do you store it? What are you doing with it? These things matter. Carl and Cussman. Coal-fired firing World War II warships. UK mined enough coal and convoy escorts weren't really in need of 22 plus knots. Yeah, I think quite a lot of the convoy escorts were coal-fired. Daniel Freeman and Dr. Swank, would a faster not Nelson with 3 times twin 15 inches and a more classic design be better or worse than Nelson's? 3 treble 15 inches and you've got a deal. Imperator Thrawn, what ships are we on about now? We're basically going through Royal Navy and American battleships because we're looking at their refit costs, and we're going to probably get onto the carrier soon because I know this group. They're going to go through the Vanguard questions and the battleship questions, and then eventually we will get onto the carrier questions, and I really need to turn my brain on. Inca, why did the RN make so little use of dive bombers after the Königsberg? When they could see how effective they were in German, US, and Japanese use. When the Royal Navy had them, they made use of them. And they were very effectively used. But if the Royal Navy had a choice between carrying a dive bomber or extra fighters, they preferred the extra fighters. And if they had the choice between carrying a torpedo bomber or a dive bomber, they'd take the torpedo bomber. Because a torpedo bomber would usually do far better for anti-submarine warfare and could also carry far more other equipment than a dive bomber. But still that, they did build dive bombing capabilities into most of their fighters as they went forward. And they did try to use them, but they mainly were used as a form of skip bombers rather than dive bombers. So, you know, they find other ways around it, and so by the time they're sort of looking at doing the sort of major anti-ship missions and sort of the major things in later in the World War II, they already have systems which will do it. So why introduce the extra logistics problems when you don't already have it? Nicistia, at Dr. Clark, if you could get an extension on the 35,000 ton limit to 40,000 tons and gun caliber to 18 inch, would you go for the H3 designs as a halfway design between O3 Nelson and G3? Not really, and I have a reason for this. I'm not a big fan of the 18-inch gun. It sounds cool and looks wonderful on paper, but you know, it's like for Britain, I think the ideal mount for a battleship is between 15 and 16-inch guns. Okay? And I think if you've got a Navy which is mostly 15-inch already, you stick with 15-inch. If you've got a Navy which is mostly 16-inch already, you stick with 16-inch, because the differences between the two are not massive enough that you need to worry about it. But once you're sort of looking at an 18-inch gun, you've got a lot more problems you're introducing in terms of stabilization of that turret, in terms of stabilization of the ship when it fires, in terms of how you're going to support and protect it. If you've got 40,000 tons and you're using 15-inch guns, you can do a very, very good ship. If you've got 40,000 tons and 18-inch guns, you're going to have to make compromises. So I prefer the 15 inches. I'm sorry, but yeah. Ryan Tool, don't worry. I have got like another 20 liters sitting out in the garage. It's you know, it's not going to be in free fall anytime soon. And I've just found another 2 stores stock it, and I'm selling it by delivery in my area. Bandhope, was there any design features made into HMS Vanguard which with thoughts of the US Yard's equipment as a result of the system during the war? Yes, there was. They were designed with the Mark 37 fire control system for their 4.5-inch guns and to provide their their general purpose weapons, because they liked the American fire control system. It was very good. General Adams Clark, yes, triple 15 inches, but using a revised hull form of the Vanguard. Ken McQuarrie, well, as the war went on, the USN started carrying a lot more fighters and fewer dive bombers. Yeah. Wonder why. Domar, does someone know where I can order 2-litre iron brew bottles in the Netherlands? Amazon, probably. They do seem to stock it everywhere. January, Dust Clock. Yes, triple 15s, but using the revised Holcomb Vanguard. I've done that already, haven't I? Moved. Yeah, there's the next question. Jeff Beeler. Were there any plans to upgrade any of the older carriers, Furious, Argus, Eagle, and Hermes, or were they going to be quietly scrapped as the armoured carriers were commissioned? Pretty much you've said it yourself. As the armoured carriers came in, basically, Illustrious to Formidable were going to come in, and that was going to see off Argus, and, well, Unicorn's going to have Argus, Eagle, Hermes, and probably Furious. Then Indomitable and Implacable. No. Indefatigable and Implacable were going to come in, and they were going to be Courageous and Glorious as replacements. It's the fun times. Danny from Denmark, sail up the Midway and just steal some. Okay, well that's an option. Stephen White, how did earlier Brit carriers handle the Avenger Tarpon? Even heard of Enterprise having problems with weight size? Basically, the biggest problem they had to deal with them and handle them was they had to be refitted with heavier cables to stop them. For the arrestor cables, they had to be heavier cables. Actually, the catapults were easier to work up. The arrestor cables were the more difficult thing for both navies. Okay, Perry Roden, 18-inch meh. Go for 20-inch guns. Oh, God. Tony Penfold, do you know if the US incorporated any ideas from RN refits into US ships? Oh, a lot of them. They were in love after looking at HMS Victorious when she came over there with her aircraft direction center, fighter direction room. The US Navy went balmy over those things, and they were copying them everywhere. They really did love it. They found the HMS Victorious was very, very illuminative to them on how the Royal Navy had got to where it got with Pedestal. And it's one of the interesting things. It's one of the interesting factors which I put through and which causes an issue with wargaming is when I'm talking to people who are wargaming, let's say the Indian Ocean and Operation Sea and all those things, Somerville, and they're doing it, they often do it on, if they're doing on American interpreted stats of the Brits. And you go, but that's based on your own operations. That's not based on the British operations. And, well, what's the difference? Well, there's what the British do in Pedestal and other convoys in the Mediterranean, where they face humongous air groups, because their land-based aircraft are far more numerous than sea-based ones. And they are managing to survive it and deal with it and coordinate and strike it. And then people go, well, no, the Japanese are better and all these things. The Japanese are very good aircraft, yes, but so were the German and the Italian aircraft better than some of the Royal Navy aircraft. The Royal Navy was still doing quite well. So this is the thing is, the Royal Navy has very good doctrine for fighter direction and fighter control. And that's something which the Americans really start to understand when they're doing the refits, and that is how they affect their developments. Natasia, do you think the 15-inch would have been possible politically, even given BT's ego and national pride at being the only major nation to have 16-inch guns? It would have been possible politically. Ego-wise of BT, probably not. But this is BT. This is BT. Hi, Domar. I'll probably be still here in half an hour. See you soon. Right now. Jeff Beeler, by the end of the war, the USN had landed most of its dive bombers and replaced them with fighters with a bigger bomb load, especially. Pretty much, yeah, that's what happens. You know, you can have dive bombers or you can have fighter bombers. Have fighter bombers. Daniel Freeman at Royal Blue. Not sure there is one. Maybe make them faster. Basically a town class. Deutschland class done properly from Royal Blue earlier. That could be in response to that. Yeah, town class are pretty much the very good surface raiders. HMS Belfast and HMS Edinburgh were really designed for Pacific surface raiding. But they weren't. They were county surface raiders, remember. Royal Navy's not allowed surface raiders. They are anti-surface raiders. The fact that to be an anti-surface raider requires the exact same or slightly better capabilities than a surface raider, we'll leave to one side. Rubber, 15 inches of belt, 27 to 30 knots, one triple 18-inch or two double 18-inch, any point, doable, sensible. It's starting to sound like a Tillman battleship. Go and look up Drax's video on the subject. Oh god, the Tillmans. Shurmak, the fighters are the most versatile ship you have. They can bomb and do fighter missions. Yeah. Basically, most versatile aircraft you can have, yes. Tony Free for Free. Most interesting technologies nicked from lesser naval powers. For instance, the Netherlands. Well, yes, there's a lovely Hazemare, which after the British have worked out fully how that works in, we take the Hazemare 40mm and we turn it into the Stag 40mm, which works very well. And I think some of them are still in use in the Falklands War. Did quite well out there. Kevin Maguire, Ashurmak, once engine power got enough for fighters to carry enough. Well, that is always the thing. You see, you have the dive bombs, you have all these things as long while you have limited engine power. Once you have more power, that you can generate more lift and carry more, then you can start having more multi-role aircraft. And, you know, it's easier to have less aircraft. Well, no, less types of aircraft. You can have more of the same type, and that's helpful because that helps you generate numbers. Okay, Daniel Freeman. It can be easier to get an innovation built in a small navy that makes plenty of one-offs rather than something like the RM buying 5 BBs at a time or 20 DDs in a batch of 4. And to an extent. For also disrupting the status quo is more in the interest of the weaker party. Yes, but honestly, also bigger navies tend to do it because they are more likely to be mucking around. You know, for example, the Royal Navy is building a whole load of the same destroyers, but we also can build HMS Savage amongst them in the height of World War II to test things out. The thing is, if you've got enough ships, you can afford for 1 or 2 to be test beds, which small navies can't. Because if small navy, if a ship doesn't work, you're in a lot of trouble. In a larger navy, if you've got a single destroyer, which is terrible, it just goes on to secondary duties and gets rolled out quite quicker than the others do. Tattoo 2. If a ship got too top heavy due to the addition of Radar Act, did they ever add extra belt armor to balance it? Not really as a rule. What they'd normally do if a ship was getting too top heavy is start landing guns. Hence the didos! Yeah, basically the only way to fix the didos is to start taking guns off them. And that's what they do. So that's why you suddenly have the didos appearing with losing one of their turrets and this and that. Because they've got too much top weight, so they have to reduce it down. Jeff Biller, session on technology in the pre-World War II Netherlands Navy, 40mm both hulls, snorkel, float planes or DDs, all sorts of things. Yeah, they're fun times. Majestic Feet. Amazon just brought me my iron brew. I first tasted, I wasn't so sure. My first taste, I realised I now have an expensive habit. Welcome to the club. Jeff Bieler, why full Mars rule okay? Full Mars are good. Actually, if they'd managed to make the full Mars, which the Royal Navy had been asking for, which would have had Hispano cannon, they would have been really, really quite nasty. Robbo, you obviously a seafaring solution to that usually is adding ballast to the keel. If there is one, maybe beef up the torpedo bulges. You could all do all those things to reduce top weight and balance the ship, but usually you start dropping guns and things. If you're a Dido class cruiser, sorry, I'm not that keen on Didos at the moment. They've been annoying me all day today. Okay. See what? Had no Chinese added rice powder to mortar and its walls lasted forever. Maybe mix iron brew with concrete and grey rebar. Oh, possibly. Donald Fritz, American destroyer Scots. Is that just a frigate? Yeah. To an extent, yes, but it's kind of like the Hunt class to escort destroyers. They are a frigate in terms of some stuff, but in terms of their weaponry and etc. These things, but they are a destroyer in terms of their structure, their hull, their design. So they are still very much a warship, whereas the frigate in World War II is sort of straddling the line a bit. Danny Freeman, also Dr. Clark. Also, Edinburgh, Belfast need to learn how the surface raiders they are hunting will think by playing them in war games or having the RN practice against them as such. Yes, this happened regularly. Pretty much it was the entire purpose of them. HMS Southampton was regularly playing a Deutschland class cruiser. In fact, in exercises she spent more time as a Deutschland class cruiser than she did as HMS Southampton. Mike Owen, first rule of Surface Raiding Club is not talking about Surface Raiding Club. I agree. Banhome, were any of the cruisers upgrading US yards? Yes, some of the cruisers went to US yards, but it's more difficult keeping track of them, and there was only so much space I could put into a video because I try and aim the introduction videos for half an hour, or roughly there. I do try to keep it to that, because otherwise I am starting to set homework, and that's just cruel. Jeff Beeler, what ship got the most useful refit after 1919? Oh, it's got to be Warsprite, because her 3 years of refit, by gum do they do things. They even replaced the toilets. Seriously, that ship was massively refit, and then you've got so much use out of her in World War II. Carl von Gasberg, refit repair costs, peacetime versus wartime, overwork extra costs. Could throw price comparison out the window. It's more expensive in wartime, but it's still cheaper than building new. Kingsrook, how much easier, harder is it to refit a sub versus a surface ship? Oh, refitting a sub is a nightmare. Seriously, you've got so many pressure seams and important parts of it. It's just, oh, good lord. More often than not, you're stripping stuff off, not adding stuff into a submarine, because that's a lot easier. Which is why you get T-class boats losing their 10 shot torpedo salvo as time goes on. Anything, resimplifying aircraft types. Strap a radar dome on the top of an F-18 and work out how to sling an ASW top on the one for the current USM. Oh. It's a possibility, but I wouldn't want to try it myself if I was the US Navy. I'd probably keep to what the current system is. I would like, if the US Navy, the biggest losses for them were the S3 Viking and the Intruder. Okay, the A6 Intruder. Those aircraft were big losses for the carrier battle group, as far as I'm concerned, because they extended out your anti-submarine warfare area to cordon that much further. No matter how good they are, they do extend it out, because the submarine has to start factoring them into their thought process. and they extended out your strike range, and losing them has caused endless problems for the carrier, because that's half the debate you get over carriers now, is going, they can't hit from long enough range, and you sort of go, well, the range you're quoting would have been well within the range of the A6 Intruder, so really what you're saying is we need to reinvent a bomb truck, or rather a cruise missile truck, which has similar performance statistics to the A6 Intruder, and then you'll be happy. Robok, Douglas Clark, the Tillman-like stats were the second part of the properly done Deutschland class question. It's a half a Tillman, so you have 2 ships, a tiny vast battleship. No. You need a certain number of guns for both protection in case you lose guns in battle, but also to keep the firing going on, to keep the firing happening and keep enough shells coming in. It's one of the reasons why the Royal Navy goes for the 6-inch over the 8-inch. And this gets me into a lot of trouble, because people go, oh, they have the longer range, they have this, with the radar, and once the radar comes in, you can now see targets, so the 8-inch is better, and the 8-inch has greater penetration, all these things. That is all true. But the rate of fire of the 6-inch is so much higher. You can get so many more shells into the air. You have such a higher chance of hitting that the 6-inch works in their favour. And the thing is, the Royal Navy works out very quickly that by the time you're approaching World War II, there are lots of systems which are a mission kill, which aren't behind armour. There are radars, there's communications arrays, there's freshwater production facilities, all sorts of stuff on a ship. And in the nicest way, if you're carrying torpedoes as well on your cruiser, if you manage to do enough damage with your shells that you got them confused, you can get in and launch some torpedoes, and then they're gone. John Luke, what were the specs going to be of an improved Renown class battlecruiser in terms of displacement, speed, armor, firepower, and any other quirks on nasty surprises? Pretty much what they did with HMS Renown prior to World War II. She's at the beginning of World War II. She's very well done up. Stephen White, did RN use Helldiver? I knew Dauntless pilot, and he stayed on Dauntless, hated Helldivers, and claimed in tight times for defence they could use Dauntless in fighter cover to shoot down dive bombers. Possibly. I don't think the RN... I think the RN did get some Helldivers, but I don't think they ever mounted a squadron of them. Tony Penfold, your view on the Fairey Firefly. Good, bad, or just okay? It was good aircraft. It wasn't bad. It was a good aircraft. It's what the Royal Navy asked for and what the Royal Navy needed. And it provides them with a lot of firepower for a long-range reconnaissance fighter and interceptor. James Dusty Clark, refitting the Abdiels with 4.5s and 40 millimeters would have negated the reason for the Didos. You could argue that, but the Abdiels were basically stripped down to... The Abdiels have basically no armour, nothing, because their entire reason is to be a high-speed mine-laying cruiser. And they go 45 plus knots when they want to. They are really, really fast ship. Everything is designed around them being high-speed. And they do things in the Channel Tunnel during... not in the Channel. Doing tunnel operations during the channel, which a tunnel operation is when you charge down the channel and you've got destroyers with you, and it's supposed to be destroyers and a cruiser. Regularly, the type of ship which would overtake them, if they were doing the Abdiel cruiser, basically the destroyers would say, we'll start off from about 20-30 miles in front of you, and you'll still catch us up before we reach the at the end of the channel. It was a sort of that kind of thing. How do I send money to the stream? That's one. I have a patron and I have the super chat. That's basically how I work. I am not really trying anything fancier at the moment. There people have sent me details for how to do fancier stuff, and I'm going to look into it. But that's going to be after I finish getting the book through and everything done, and I've got brain space for it. Donofitz, did the US use radars? I would assume you don't want to run into a 12 6-inch guns. Yeah, basically, you've got it again. The US Navy's light cruisers were their closest thing to a surface radar. But the US Navy liked heavy cruisers too much, really, to really do proper surface radars. Because they liked a well-balanced heavy cruiser rather than a heavy cruiser which was so orientated around just its guns that it couldn't survive anything. Admiralty of the Fluff. I presume there's a doggy involved, in which case, hello doggy. Why use ships for stuff that they're bad at, e.g. battle cruisers in lines of battle where they had no place in being, or let them hunt cruisers, or just stop looking? Yeah. Okay, so, here's the thing. Even admirals can get confused, but also there are times when you just don't have enough ships. And try as they might, the idea of thinking behind the Battle of Tsushima, where literally people were adding up the number of Russian guns and adding up the number of Japanese guns and presuming the Russians were going to win, doesn't ever go away. People always have the idea that volume of guns, that sheer number of them is going to matter. And it does matter. But the trouble is, if that sheer volume of number of guns is attached to ships which are less than capable of doing the job you're asking to, you're going to be in a problem. Okay, right. Carl von Casper, submarine refit. A sub is a few thousand tons at most, not a few dozen thousand tons. Yes, and that's another trouble with refits. They're far, far tighter on a submarine. Donna Fritz, the submarines had sunk anything a radar could have sunk, but the CLs were busy being AA boats. Yeah, that's pretty much it. They had them, but they just didn't use them as it. Well, they did at certain points, but not really. Task Force 74, the cruiser destroyer group that's done with the Australians, is really the closest the US Navy gets to running a surface radar operation in World War II. Turning 343, Guppy conversion, worth it, or would newer subclasses be better? Newer, probably. Submarines get far, far tighter stuff on them. You know, they've got all the pressure of the hulls, and there's only so many times you can dive, so it's always better to build new if you can. Ken McGuire, for something that loiters around the fleet for radar, early warning and sub, yes. I want something that is more big trunk and not sleek multi-role fighter. Yep. Lionheart X-ray. Whenever I think of rate of fire, I think of the Brooklyn class. Yeah, I can see why. Mitchellites, the problem with refitting subs is having to cut into the pressure hull to get at the internals. The thing you're counting on keeping water out of the people tank at depth. Yeah, so if you cut into the pressure hull, you create a problem. You create a potential line of fault line, and that's problematic. Jepida, only good didos were Scylla and Shebidus with 4.5s and the latter's command facilities. They were pretty good. I think Royalist also was fairly good. I have a lot of time for Royalist. Ben Grogan, James Carter, yes, with the opening moments of contact, the sooner you get the range, the faster you've won the fight. Yep. That is true. Jeff Miller, what have you heard lately about Queen Elizabeth and Prince of Wales? They're doing okay, from all I've heard. They are plotting through their things. They're developing nicely. They're going to be good systems when they're in service. But the thing is, we need to build the fleet around them, and we need to make sure they're properly supplied, and we need to make sure we have a properly balanced fleet. So you can't go from having an amphibious-centered force to a strike-centered force. You need both forces. You need both strike and amphibious, which is why I keep going on about 3 sort of Canberra-class sort of style LHDs with ski ramps being useful for the Royal Navy to replace ocean Ocean, Albion, and Bulwark, and probably Argus. Let's be honest, because the Royal Navy needs that sort of mix of 5 flight decks and 3 docks to guarantee the availability of 2 flight decks and a dock, at least 1 dock for any operations you've got coming on. And that is the way you can guarantee it. If you've got the 5 flight decks and the 3 docks, you can start to guarantee those sort of things. Sure, Mac, Omhas are a bit of a meme. They are. Most of these things are a bit of a meme. Amnesty of the Floof. No dog, 3 bunnies on Instagram. Hugely drag-inspired. 3 bunnies. Well, that will count. That will count. We'll accept the 3 bunnies. We used to have bunny rabbits when I was younger. James Carter. Yeah. Sure, Mac. With the battle cruisers, the older ones were lumped into the ones that were more suited to fleet scout battle line support role. Yeah, pretty much. The older battle cruisers, as it goes down, closer and closer to armored cruisers and sort of cruising role. Because battle cruisers become weaker far quicker than battleships. Battleships have a life. Battle cruisers have a half-life, and that is the thing. Carl von Gausberg, Fulma and the Mediterranean. I guess they had to tangle with BF-110s as escorts, not BF-109s, and dodging those 6 guns with an extra pair of eyes is more durable than surviving. They did have BF-109s to deal with. They did have all sorts of things. They did quite well, because what most people forget about the Fulma is it's a very tough plane. The Fulma is basically... The Fulma is incredibly strong as an aircraft. It can take an incredibly large amount of punishment for its size. There are pictures I've seen of them coming back with hundreds of holes from machine guns in them, and they've still been flying perfectly fine. And they have apparently, on that, it's been a successful thing because they've taken out a couple of enemy aircraft. And remember, their job is to disrupt enemy attacks, because the enemy can only really be successful in an anti-ship attack when you're going in against ship-based air defenses, is if you can coordinate and you can overwhelm. If your attack's disrupted, so if you're no longer able to all come in from multiple angles, so the ship can concentrate its fire on you and it can maneuver to avoid your attacking weapon, you have a lot of problems. So, that's the whole point. The air defense on a carrier from a naval perspective isn't so much about killing the enemy as disrupting the enemy, which is something to bear in mind. Osprey 28. Why did the USN switch from arming cruisers and destroyers with torpedoes to just destroyers? Mainly because they realised the cruisers weren't getting any good shots off. And it meant you could get rid of something very explosive sitting on your deck outside the armour. Ben Grogan, that's Clark. On the subject of CLs becoming AA ships, AAA ships, is that more a matter of weight of throw than being more stable platforms or better fitted with fire directors? Basically, because they are more stable, they are able to take more guns, and they're able to provide those guns better fire direction. So that's why you end up with light cruiser air defenses. Thank you, Mason. People bring up Jutland as an example of the battlecruisers being misused, yet most losses at Jutland were also inflicted by battlecruisers. Yep. That's one of the things. But remember, as I said, battlecruisers have a half-life. Battleships have a life. So, in this way, your battlecruiser, which is your best battlecruiser today, will not be a good battlecruiser in a year or so's time when a faster generation of battleships come out, because they will catch up. Whereas you will need to move forward. Warspite's the example of this. She gets a lot faster post-refit in the 1930s. That's a problem, because then it means if you're building a battlecruiser, in the 1930s, you would have to build a much faster battlecruiser to be able to get away from her. So battleships have a life expectancy. Battlecruisers have a half-life. And they're on the spectrum. And they get... Basically, a battlecruiser, if it's built on the battlecruiser spectrum, could start off at this end And as its life goes on, it moves down to this end. Daniel Fitz, how's the British and I guess the rest of the world react to the Alaska-class Heavy C8? Seems like a baby hour. Pretty much they're going, lovely, you've built it, move on. The Americans don't seem to know what to do with them once they got them, so they never present anyone really a big worry. They'd have been more interesting if they had been given to the Soviets. That would have been a major problem for the world. Genuine, my problem with the Brooklyns is in the extra turret, which such limited firing arcs, hence the Clevelands. Yep. Ian Carr, ski ramps for swordfish? You didn't need them for the swordfish. Although they could have probably used them. God help us. If you can ever find a video, I think Armored Carriers has it on his site, of a swordfish taking off rocket assisted. That is interesting to watch. John Luke, how effective were the USN strategy of using 4 sea control type ships, AW times 25 and 12 light frigate fighters in place of 1 supercarrier and 4 destroyers as a force to engage the plan or similar foe? Look, it's a constant idea I see come back and forth. And my point always is this. If you want to generate sorties and you want to generate strike power, you want larger carrier. And you need the power of the battle group. So that's what you have. But, and here's the thing. You don't need to have it all on the larger carrier. You can have a mixture. I think we were talking about this in bilge pumps, me and Drac and Jamie. And basically the idea I was sort of talking about was that if you had a super carrier, and even a couple of them, and then you had a couple of Queen Elizabeth size carriers with them, that's a perfectly sensible task force and a perfectly capable group. And let's be honest, you could probably buy the two Queen Elizabeth class for less than the cost of one of the super carriers. But the thing for the USN is they have got the super carrier production line going, so keeping that going makes sense. Because they'd have to start up a new production line, and that's going to cost money as well. So, you know, these things are all issues. Right then, so turning 343, aren't Dutch LSDs considered in RN operations, or will those be closer tied to Germany? Well, theoretically they'd be closer tied to Germany, but usually they're considered part of RN because they work more often on RN. Badhome, given that the A6 Intruder was so useful, does the QECVs with ski drum have a problem? Should a new A6 Intruder be made in 10-20 years? No, because the Royal Navy is different from the American Navy. Okay, if you're going for a Catabar carrier, that makes sense. But if you're the Royal Navy, if you've only got limited number of ships, and as I said, if you're talking about limited ships, you want 3 LHDs to replace Albion, Bulwark and Ocean. Because then you've got 5 ships and you can use the same aircraft from all 5 of the ships. If you have a Catabar carrier, you're never going to have a Catabar LHD. So you end up with only 2 carriers at best, possibly just 1. And that's not enough. You're not going to be able to generate your force reliably on that. You need to have a certain level of critical mass to be able to reliably develop force. So, yes, a Catabar carrier and things like the A6 Intruder, etc. from a Catabar carrier are the far more perfect solution, the far better individual solution. But as a national strategic solution, the ski ramp and the F-35B is the better option. Domar, is the Fulmar the armoured division of the Air Force? Pretty much, to an extent. They do take a lot of damage. Ships are due in late life refit, and by that point emails are likely a more mature technology. Possibly, but I doubt it. You have to do a lot of reworking to the ship to put in emails, including fixing some of the issues. And they're not bad ships, but they're like any ship. They all have issues. Sure, Mac. US also thought that battle range would increase dramatically, which is why they focus on having the inclined belts. Yep. Kingsrook, how much refitting did the Canadian yards end up doing? Not as much as you'd think they would have done. They end up doing far more construction work. And taking on a lot of the merchant ship duties. Especially Hamilton. Carl von Gasberg, Fulmar again, disrupting the attack craft and surviving the escort fighters and 20mm shells. Yeah, pretty much it works. Ken McGuire, while I would agree the Dreadnought was much more useful at the time of the World War I than Invincibles, were the Nelsons really more useful in World War II than the Hood? They survive longer, so they're more useful. But, honestly, I'd have been happy to swap all three for about 4 more Queen Elizabeths. Admiralty of Fluff. The Nelson class AV-16 was realised to not be the real thing, right? So, if the RM was building new ships and thus new guns, some 60-inch as Nelson to avoid ammo checkers or 15-inch? I'd have gone for 15-inch. 15-inch, you've got so many ships with 15-inch, go with them. Why start 14? Why? Why ruin a very good battleship design? Why? Why make your King George V with 14-inch guns? I know it's politics, I know it, but just tell politics to bugger off. Excuse the French. It's just terrible. It's cruelty to the ships. Okay, Greg Satsky, at Doctor of the Clock. The Chieftain has a video on the AA tank on tanks where he says the same thing. The job of the AA isn't to kill the plane, it's to disrupt his attack enough to prevent him succeeding. Yeah. Basically, if they drop their bomb and miss, they have to fly home to get more bombs. That's a win. Jeff Beale, HMS Victorious' 50s refit. What happened? Would a new carrier have been cheaper? Probably, considering the amount they spent on her. But the thing was, Victorious had such a name that that the government weren't going to scrap her, and the Royal Navy knew if they tried to go for a new carrier, it might get cancelled. So it was far better for them to rebuild a carrier than to go for a new one, because they weren't going to scrap Victorious. That was the advantage. Sometimes it is in a name. Donna Fitz, you mentioned the Alaskas and the USSRs. What do you think they would have done to them? I think, in the nicest way, the Alaskas would have fitted in nicely with their idea for what they were going to do as Sveldals, which was surface raiders. That's what they were going for. Oh. Tell politics to bother her off. Yeah, that would be good. That's going to be a good concluding a sentence to your dissertation, Michael Rose. That will be a good one. Steam White, the Torque bomber, Albacore, I think, looks interesting. How effective? They were very, very quiet, but they weren't really as good as they needed to be. They weren't enough improvement over the Swordfish. But they were very, very quiet. They were designed to be very quiet because it was designed for night attacks, long range, and in an era when they thought that actually listening air defenses might develop faster than radar. So they're designed to be very quiet. Tony Penfold, if HMS Hood had survived, would she have been refitted in the US? If so, what was planned? It would have been a refit along the lines of what happened to Renown, 4.5 inches, and all sorts of things fitted probably. Ben Grogan, Clark, a Ratto Swordfish. I expect it to look like a cartoon. It's an interesting video. It is an interesting video. I think it's on armoured carriers. I don't think they were often done, but sometimes when they're taking the really heavy loads off the little escort carriers, when they're taking the full anti-submarine load, oh yeah, they'd be rocket assisted. Jane, if a Swordfish could take off from the bow of an R-class battleship if you turned it into the wind, probably could have, yes. I now have a vision of our new 21st century QE class carriers being equipped with Swordfish to balance out the F-35Bs. You might be onto something there, Daniel, because thinking about it, modern air defences are all designed for quite a lot faster aircraft than a Swordfish, so, yeah, the shock value of just using them, even just once, would probably completely torture your opponent. Vision. Captain Hara in Japanese destroyer captain praises Nagumo, but he is critical of Yamamoto as a tactician. Yamamoto better as a diplomat, political animal than a fleet commander. Honestly, frankly, the Japanese had problems with most of their admirals in some respects. Really, the Japanese, to fight World War II and stand a chance, they needed a Henderson and a Cunningham. They needed a Henderson to command the Pacific. And no, a Cunningham to command the Pacific and a Henderson to command the construction and organise the fleet. They unfortunately had constant battles with the army and all sorts of other issues taking place, though, which meant that they never really got that. Seen Blue Angel show with Big C-130. Ah, yes. Rato takeoff in as well. Yes, that is fun. When the Big C-130 takes off in the Blue Angels, that is really quite fun to watch. Then from Tony Penfold, there are details of that on the Hood website. Yep. Donna Fritz, Virginia-class cruiser. Why no more nuclear-powered non-CVs out of the USN? I have no idea. Honestly, it would make sense, but it's the cases. They're just not building them. They're just not building them. They've gone for the very best, and I can understand why they have. But it's very expensive to maintain a fleet on the very best, and it's often one of the reasons given for the reduction in carrier numbers is they're always comparing building a fleet of carriers entirely of the very best carriers versus a fleet, and then therefore they need to reduce that number to afford the new super technologies. When you go, well, actually, you could probably maintain carrier numbers the same if you just went, right then, how many nuclear carriers do we need? About 9, and we could make do with the rest with about 6. Or we could, can you do with 8 and 7 or 8 and 8? Can you have 8 nuclear carriers and 8 gas-powered carriers? So 8 Gerald Fords and 8 Queen Elizabeth Star carriers, size carriers. All Catabar, and it would be perfectly fine. And you could have 2 squadrons of carriers on both coasts, both the Atlantic and the Pacific fleet. So you'd have 8 carriers in each. And you could have the nuclear carriers for the really high risk jobs and the regular carriers for the other jobs, and you'd have this force. And if you combine it with, I don't know, another 12 or maybe even 16 LHDs, you've suddenly got a very, very competent force for the United States to dominate the world, which is what they really want, because it's nice being number one, if you are prepared to do the jobs that come with being number one. John, look, wouldn't the US Navy been more able to fulfill the same global roles as the Army in World War II prior to Pearl Harbor Force? No. Basically, the US Navy don't really achieve what the Royal Navy had in terms of being a global force till about 1946, 47? Yeah, you've got to go 46, 47. Roughly, is when they get there. And that's after World War II and after the impact of World War II. Donald Fritz, Virginia class is so beautiful, and they just look... Yeah, it is a pretty ship. Kevin Guy, logistics guys, I am sure would have preferred a 15-inch KGV class. Yes, everyone would have preferred a 15-inch KGV class. Carl von Gausenberg, Yeah, well, you know, it's wide 14-inch KGV facepalm. Hold my beer. Channel Ross never getting 15-inch. No. But that's the German Navy. That's the Reichsmarine, then Krieg... Or is it Kriegsmarine, then Reichsmarine, or Reichsmarine, then Kriegsmarine? It's Reichsmarine, then Kriegsmarine. You know, the German Navy go through so many name changes they don't know what they're even called, let alone what they're buying. You know, they can be excused, that one. Royal Navy has no excuse. Kopf Offenschlau. What DD had the most effective AA in 1939? Probably one of the British, and it's probably the tribal class, because they have the most AA of anyone in 1939. Really, the tribal class do. They have a lot of anti-air power in 1939. Juicy Susan, I agree with your message to Daniel, but as I've said before, my little cousins are probably watching this, so in the nicest way, I'm vetoing the language. I have no qualms with myself, but I have a feeling if the young ones who are under the ages of they're quite young see that language, I will get beaten up by their mums. So yeah, I'm not letting that through, but I agree. Jeff Beeler, if Victoria's refit had gone better, much better, would her sisters and half sisters have been refitted too, or did some of them have too much damage? Some of them would have been refitted, but some did have way too much damage. So it would have been fine. Donald Fritz. Donald Freeman. I never thought of it from that. I guess at the time you have lots of sub coming out, so it would be better the harder start. Thanks. There's lots of reasons why to do it. Come on, guys. Swordfish XX at a 21st century. A biplane UAV might be worth it. Actually, I did write a paper which is on global maritime history, or is it on another one? Might have been on European geostrategy when that was still around, which is about the swordfish as a modern, as a template for modern UAVs, and there was quite a lot of things for it. Kopf Ottischau. Why do I get the feeling that my name is hard to pronounce for an English speaker? It probably is, but also it wasn't helped by the fact that it was kind of hidden on my screen by my mouse halfway through it when I was reading it first time. Okay. Admiralty of the Floof. US pilots seem to think little to the Type 318 AA shell of Yamato. Might have been more useful against the swordfish. No, it wouldn't have been any more useful against the swordfish. Even they could have avoided that. Decision is the lesson of World War I, World War II, that when facing a dominant enemy in an economic war, direct conflict should be avoided entirely to focus only on asymmetric strategies. No, because asymmetric strategies don't really deliver you victory. Sea denial is great, but it's only sea control which can allow you to use the sea. So if you can't get sea control with something, don't try. The first rule of war should always be, the first rule of force, as I've always been taught, is only use force when you can win and when it's necessary. And in the nicest way, if you can't win, then don't do it. And if it isn't necessary, don't do it. Because it's usually better long run not to. Try and use other ways to destabilize your opponent using military force. Fight the peace better. What the Royal Navy was doing to the poor Japanese out in the Pacific when they were allowed to do it properly. Danny Freeman, decision. Or maybe it's 1, don't invade Russia, and 2, don't get tied down in a land war in Asia. Don't get tied down in a land war anywhere if you can avoid it. One of the reasons the Royal Navy Britain had so many successful wars is they avoided being tied down in land wars. They have a habit of buying other people to do it for them. Sean Mack, that's one of South Korea's concerns about the LPO2s. The North is keeping around. Yeah, that's the trouble. They just go so slow. Decision. The Japanese needed competent government, which they didn't get because ultra-nationalist nutjobs. Yeah. There again, competent government would have started a war in the first place. A competent government would have found another way to win the war before they started it. In a nice way, competent government would have probably gone all in. I think half the trouble with the Japanese war effort is they're always fighting it with the idea that they think the Americans are the Russians. And they forget that they have been beaten by the Russians in the Soviet Union form in 1939. They ain't gonna. There is too much coming their way. They're fighting a very different enemy, and they don't understand us. And Daniel Freeman, Clark, you've missed my Princess Bride reference about land wars in Asia. I think I've managed to miss Princess Bride as a whole, as a movie franchise. Jeff Beeler, Japanese seem to have been caught up in every admiral needs their own force and you cannot combine them. Yeah, there are so many issues. Sean Mack, also, Nagumo wasn't a good commander. The Japanese had officer problems. I wouldn't say the US and UK had an embarrassment of riches, but they certainly had a very fortunate system in that they managed to generate quite a good crop they could draw from. Donna Fritz, how do you feel with USS America losing its well deck for more of an air wing? Just heard the part about where you talked about the best versus a few of the others. Yeah, we see the thing is, I think that's going a bit half-heartedly because they've basically made her into an aviation ship, but they haven't given her the equipment she needs to be an aviation ship, i.e. a ski ramp. So they've gone, right then, we're going to make you an aviation-centric ship, but we're not going to give you the one tool which is actually going to make you viable in this role. Because it is going to limit your aircraft and their ability to deploy. So, I think that's a step, but I don't think it's a good step. Kevin McTaggart, Dr. Clark, do you think the USN is building nuclear carriers due to the fact that they want energy security? I think they're building them because they're big and impressive, and they're the best they can build, and because they've got the production line going, and to stop it or even slow it down or admit you're going to build something else will cause political issues. Akim simply reuse nuclear versus conventional carriers. US sources believe that the political cost of one nuclear carrier is the same as one conventional carrier. Probably, politically, potentially. Simon Fish, Dr. Clark, I know there was treaty limits on destroyer size. However, do you know if there were any designs for a larger, longer Triber class with 2 torpedo launchers? Try L-90s. Henderson did have the plans. And he felt he should be able to implement them after the treaty started going wrong, but they didn't allow him to. Then they dust them off, and they turned them into the battle class. Then from Kof why do I've done that one? John Luke, in any major war, the USN would be supplemented by allied ships. If so, how large would China have to build to offset the current US fleet and any average combination of allied support in conflict? A lot more. A lot more. Yes, they would have probably home court advantage if they played home court advantage. I don't think they would play home court advantage. I think they would get egotistical and would go out of home court. I think they would try and go beyond the island chains, beyond the South China Sea, into the Pacific. And I think that's where they get into trouble. Because I think they have an ego problem. Like most rising powers do. It's not unique to the Chinese, and most rising nations have an ego problem. It is what tends to be their downfall. See what? Next to cycle out is Nimitz. Yep. That old. And with JFK coming on, she is next. Would they... Right, is a nuclear... memorialized from nuclear carrier unfold? It'll be an issue. It'll be an issue. Memorializing the US and nuclear carrier is an issue. Bishop, maybe the issue of Japanese admirals was constant beating in the Naval Academy. Not really. It was just... Yeah, the Japanese admirals have all sorts of issues going on. They have all sorts of issues. Come after, out of pure interest, did the IJN ever start to attack their true enemy, the army? Yeah, they had fun. They did have fun. Okay. Journey with Jeff Beeler. The Victorious refit went wrong because too many changes were made, including the engine change halfway through. The flight deck was fitted 3 times. They had to do these things, though. In this way, it wasn't because they wanted them, they had to do them. They made issues. They had all sorts of problems with it, and basically the naval constructors were brought in to try and fix it. Because they tried to hand it off to another company, a shipyard to do it, and it didn't go well. And then they had to fix the fix of the fixes. Schumach, nothing the Germans can do will allow them to knock out the UK, so they might as well not have bothered. That's, to an extent, it. But there were options, but they just didn't have the time to develop them. Danny Freeman, I think it's how to cut up the ship gets pulling out the nuclear reactor. That would also depend as well. Arrow Floof, any notable Swiss contribution to naval warfare? There was actually, I think, a Swiss contingent at the rather large battle, which was mostly Venice and Spain versus the Ottomans in the Mediterranean, which I can't remember the name of for life of me at the moment, and in galleys. But I think that's the last time I remember a major Swiss contingent and being involved in naval warfare. Ian Carr, did the USN get much involved in the Indian Ocean until the mid-1960s in East of Suez? Basically, late 1940s, they start showing up, which is why I say 1946, 47. Shulmac, well, when the Fletcher is the one you sideline in the Pacific, you're pretty well off. Pretty much, yeah. SNPI, could you give your opinion on the expeditionary transfer dock of the USN? It's a nice idea. I think it's a lovely idea. I think it's very sensible if you think you're going to be fighting in places without large ports you're going to need to move a lot of equipment into. But I also think in the nicest way you're going to need to have to defend it, and I'm surprised they haven't given it some sort of its own air defense system. Night Heron Productions, hi! You just mentioned the Japanese thinking they had a handle on the US when they didn't. Can the same be said for Britain? One would assume no, due to their successes. They waited for Britain to be well absorbed in a European war. So that was their handle on the Britain. And it was one which you couldn't really ignore if you're British. Because the British are heavily involved fighting in Europe, fighting in the Mediterranean. They're fighting pretty much everywhere, all across the Atlantic, in the Arctic, all over these places. And then, well, then you have the Japanese pile in as well. And at that point, the British are just going, oh, for God's sake, you. Sorry about the French again. Jeff Beeler, what are the worst post-World War I refits? That's traumatic just thinking about it. I would say what happens to some of the cruisers post-World War I, especially some of the ones which thankfully don't make it into World War II, is quite nasty. Very nasty. Especially what some of the American cruisers get happen to them is just, yeah, why would you do that to a ship? I mean, seriously, why? I think one ship ends up losing all its water production facility, freshwater production facilities, barring one system, because they've said this will be enough because it can create enough water, and you can all guarantee what happens. It breaks down every 2 days, so they don't have water. So basically, this is why you have multiple systems to generate fresh water on a warship. Chai Johannak. In a war, China would have to have at minimum go into the Indian Ocean to protect their sea lanes from Mini soil. At minimum, and in the nicest way, that's as long as the Indians aren't also against them. If the Indians are part of the Allies against them, then they have problems. Bichon, informed of Pearl Harbor attack, Hera turns to Sun Tzu's to win without fighting, tosses it aside since it's too late for that, settles on words of Master Swordfighter, adapt to the situation. Yeah, sounds sensible. Michael Oates, when the Chinese carrier went on its little cruise, I'll bet dollars the US Fast Attack sub had its nose. Yeah, it did. You can be sure of that. Probably more than one. Hi, Carl. Hope Belgium's nice. Carl McClatch, La Panta is in a big galley battle. Yes, that was it, La Panta. Sorry, I couldn't remember La Panta for the life of me. That's the trouble. You have so much going around in there, didn't you? Forget the important things. Osprey 28. What vessel is pictured on your right above the grey diamond? On my right. So that'll be my left. That'll be my right above the grey diamond. That will be that is HMS Montrose, and those pictures were taken by when my dad was on a fitting out cruise. And there is also a ship behind me, which is some Type 22s and various other Type 22s around. Yes, I have lots of frigates in here. Inappy, hello. If I didn't say hello earlier. Perrin, Inappy, Switzerland reveals their 30 helicopters. Yeah, I know that's a humoristic post, but I would never count Switzerland out on that, Perry Roden. Janewith, Jeffrey, agreed, but post-World War II, that seems to be a way of Iron plans. Half-hearted and probably too much political input, where finance is involved. It's not so much political input as political indecision. The Royal Navy comes up with a plan based on the money they're told they're going to get, and then the politicians change how much money they're going to get. And that means they have to change their ideas again, and it happens again, and again, and again. These things happen. It's problematic to deal with. Shomak, Japanese success was due to very good staff work. The problems started happening because they didn't know what they would do next. I would argue it's not very good staff work because they didn't have a plan for what they do next and they didn't properly think it out. As I've said before, the options are block the Panama Canal somehow, i.e. blow up something in there or do something damage to those locks, gates, to stop the US Navy being able to resupply properly, carry out the full range of attacks you're planning on the Pearl Harbor to make sure you sink those ships, land troops on Pearl Harbor in Hawaii to take Hawaii, because if you could do that just after you launch attacks, you're again going to push the American starting points back to the other side of the Pacific, and they have to take Hawaii to be able to get on there. So you turn everything from where are they going to hit to we know where they're going to hit, we can concentrate and work our forces around them. There are lots of options, but they don't think it through because they think they think it's going to be like Tsushima. They're going to win a big battle and they're going to win all these victories and everyone's going to want to negotiate with them. They haven't seen what the British are doing to Germany. They haven't seen what the British are doing to Italy. Doesn't matter how many people declare war, the British aren't giving in. And the Americans aren't going to give in either. So, you know. Steve Mike got very old yearbook for pilots who spent time in Switzerland. Mostly US and British bombers. Crew cover rough shape, but pics inside show a large bomb force for in the war. They had all sorts of things. John Luke, was Jackie Fisher's ideas and his legacy ultimately more positive or negative to the RN? Corbett was a contemporary of Fisher, and he had a more beneficial impact. Fisher, I sit on the fence really with him because, frankly, I think some of his ideas are terrible, and some of the damage he does, especially in terms of present ships around the world, whilst I can understand it, were also very damaging. However, he does also put some much needed reforms through. Kurt Over, what makes you such a fan of the F6F? Oh, let me get my F6F, courtesy of the wonderful Drac. Now, for starters, why wouldn't you be a fan of this aircraft? It is beautiful. But most importantly, they are these aircraft which achieve so much and they just don't look like anything else. They're these pugnacious fighters, these huge things. And if you go stand next to the one in Duxford, I stood there, and I've got a picture from a few years ago where they had it sitting next to the Hellcat. So I had the Hellcat and the Wildcat, actually, I had the Hellcat and the Wildcat sat next to each other. And I've got a picture of me in my PhD thesis of me standing between the two going, because they are just such good aircraft. They are incredibly reliable, they're incredibly strong, survivable, and, you know, all these things. Jeff Beeler, that wasn't the fluffy research assistant barking. My fluffy research assistant doesn't bark that often, but when he does bark, trust me, everyone knows about it. Everyone. But I just think the S6F is a well-balanced aircraft. You know, it works very well. Seems you have a lot of anti-iron brew bottles as well. Well, these bottles get reused as my water bottles. So they're lovely glass bottles. They keep the water very, very cool. And it's good for the environment. Plus, mentally, I can imagine they're iron brew flavoured water. Don't look at me funny. It's not an addiction, I promise. So, Rackstore, for a steamship, the water issue is even more critical, as the overriding concern isn't a portable water, it's the makeup feeders. Every steam plant will lose water in the act of normal operation. Yeah. You know, you need a lot of water on a steam-powered ship. Perrodin, Inappy, viewed from distance, your profile picture looks like the lower body of a Dalek armor. It does from a distance. It does, actually. I've got it. I can now look at it. I agree with that one. A very cool-looking Dalek, but a Dalek. Sean Mack, what I mean is that the Japanese planned out good operations, but they were poorly placed in larger strategy. Yeah, okay, I'll accept that. Tishira Bearcat. Tishira Bearcat. Bearcat, I like. I like the Bearcat. I always thought the Japanese issue was there was no realistic way they could win. Thus, if they can't win, the fantasy was the only option. The thing was, they gambled, but they didn't gamble big enough to win. You'd have had to gone really big to win. They didn't. Donald Fritz, Des Moines 8-inch turret. How good were they really? Let's put it this way. I prefer the 8-inch turrets than the County Mark 1s. Belong, this has always fascinated me. Why did the Japanese think the GBDSA would just say, "Oh, you got us, let's talk"? Had they never read a history book? Their experience with Russia, and it's Greeks versus Romans. That's what I always base it back. Basically, the Greek style of warfare was always to have a big battle and then negotiate. And the Japanese culture seemed to expect this to be the case. They didn't understand the fighting to the end. Come on, huge Hellcat is a baby Avenger. Yeah, but she's got a powerful engine and far lighter, so yeah, she's cool. I like Hellcats. In-car, HMS Furious. Early unsuccessful AC conversion was similar to that of what the IJN did to IC. How did they expect this to work? You have no eye. I look at some of the things they're doing, and it's desperation. It's basically what you're dealing with in the later war, in terms of Japan, is this sort of, not individually, but as a nation, it's a wounded animal cornered, and it's flailing around. It's at its most dangerous, but it's also flailing around and not really sure what it's going to do. Jeff Beeler and Martin Sims, I do agree with both of you. F6F was easy to fly, and it was a proper carrier fighter with wide undercarriage and tough as an old boot. Yep, these are all good things which I liked about it. Inappy, when did AA missiles become a viable air defense? The US and Brit did produce very few ships with post-World War II heavy AA gun systems. Basically, AA missiles start to become viable towards the end of the 1960s, really. They're theoretically viable beforehand, but yeah, by the end of the 1960s, really. And the US Brits did produce a few heavy AA gun systems. It's usually 4.5 inches for Brits and 5 inches for the Americans. And you see them. Daring class destroyers. Happy. On the other hand, the French, who had to start from scratch, produced destroyers frigates with heavy semi and auto 157mm batteries. Yeah, but that's the French. Inappy, hey, it's a plate of cookies I baked. Oh, even more lovely than the Dalek scenario. Vision, what orange ships should not have been axed by Fisher? A lot of the present ships, a lot of the smaller cruisers and gunboats which are around the world, because presence was important. Presence is not just about the Navy being there, it's about the intelligence and information you get from being there. And the crew training, and the command training you get from having those ships out there. Jan made the same mistake as Hannibal. With 3 to 4 battles, Rome would capitulate. On modern terms, Russia and China likely fall foul of the attitude in confrontation with USA and NATO. Depends if they think that their NATO and etc. USA are prepared to fight. If they think they're not prepared to fight, then yeah, they're likely to fall foul of it. Donna Fritz, British Corsairs, what did they think of them? I heard that it's really hard to land with a long nose, but what issues did the Brits have with them and what did they like? Well, they liked a lot about them. They really did. So, please note what aircraft Eric Winkle Brown has on the front cover. So the Corsair has a lot of issues. It has some issues, but it's okay. This is what Eric Winkle Brown, test pilot, naval air serviceman, writes. It was with this. There can be no doubt that the Corsair was one of the fastest naval aircraft of World War II, and few of its pilots criticised it from its performance standpoint. It had good range, adequate firepower, an extremely reliable engine, and it could absorb a lot of punishment. However, in my view, it left much to be desired as a fighter from the viewpoint of manoeuvrability, and this same shortcoming was apparent in the dive bombing role in which it saw widespread use. Finally, it had a very dreary track record as a deck landing aircraft. Many were the pilots that lauded its high-speed performance, but decried its lack of affinity with a carrier deck. It was with this unenthusiastic regard for the Corsair lingering in my memory that I found myself faced with the same aircraft in slightly different guise a number of years later in 1951, when I was posted on attachment to as test pilot to the US Naval Air Test Center in Patuxent River. On the inventory of the flight test was the AU-1, a dedicated low-layer ground support derivative of the original Corsair, evolved specifically for the Marine Corps use in the Korean War. Fitted with a single-stage, two-speed R2800 83WA version of Double Wasp, with a sea-level combat rating of 2,800 horsepower, a lot more armour in the cockpit and engine sections, and a built-in armament of 4 20mm Mark VI cannon with 231 rounds per gun, the AU-1 had taken on a lot of weight by comparison with World War II Corsairs, for which I was familiar. Understandably, performance suffered. Hi, Drac. Drax, there's a free-range Drac Infernal. But, yeah. So, basically, Corsair. That's a fun aircraft. Right then. Jarek, Veterani Sumi, what Japanese destroyers are the closest to the tribals, combined with what your overall thoughts on Japanese destroyers? My book, which has the pictures, is currently buried beneath a whole load of stuff, so I'm not going to be getting that out. Well, let's put it this way. There is a reason that the Japanese destroyer I have picked out for a potential potential flotilla, on my Discord. Where have I put the list of them? So I can make sure I pronounce it correctly. Probably it's in the Discord, actually. Let me just open the Discord quickly. Nope, I've lost it, but I did pick out a Japanese destroyer type. I'll just look up the list again. Ah, there is my list. Let's get the right page. I think I've gone for the Hatsuhara class, which I quite like, out of the Japanese destroyers. I think they're quite well balanced. They're nice ships. Vision, Admiral Yamato is famous for the quotes of Japan having to fight the war to the White House. Did fear of certain defeat hurt Japanese leadership? Yes. It made them far too conservative when they needed to be far more aggressive than they were going to be. Juicy Shooting, I'm not sure the Chinese are cut out for the offense. They've got no historical experience. They have. It's called Admiral Zheng He. And besides, the whole of China is an empire, let's be honest. the Han Empire. But that gets me into trouble. Sure, Mike, Bill Long. It really is cultural that I believe it's a capitalist conspiracy to keep them down compared with the healthy dose of 30s. Yeah, there's all sorts of issues. Potter, so I have a posted slogan, the British Navy guards the freedom of us all. I think I got it from the Imperial War Museum. It has a warship with 2 quad turrets forward. Any idea what it could be? Not one which actually exists. But there was a planned town class which would have had 4 quad turrets, and there was an idea that you could have had the King George V's with quad turrets. So, you know, it could have been one of those as imagined with their full quad turrets. Dracofinal, how far back would missile technology be set back if a war in the late 50s, early 60s had seen missile ships badly hit by airstrikes and gunships? It would have been set back a long way, let's be honest. And that probably actually is what would have happened. Because the missiles would have run and weren't being carried in enough numbers, would have run out, and the guns would have still been firing. So that is the issue. You know, missiles are well and good, but they have to get reliable, they have to get accurate, they have to get viable. And the first generation really aren't. Jeff Beeler, Fisher did scrap many less useful rebuilt ships, though. Yes, he did scrap many ships which were not yet as useful. But the trouble is, it would have been better to replace them. Seen pics of U.S. aircraft, Army aircraft, flying drone experiments of World War I. Hard to think that they were flying radio-controlled that early. Well, Tesla had radio-controlled boats he used on ponds in Central Park pre-war. Yes, lots of radio-control. Remember, the British had radio-controlled aircraft the entire way through the interwar years, pretty much, as their Queen Bee drones, which were used for AA testing. The Royal Rooster. How were nuclear weapons secured on minor US warships, i.e. nuclear depth charges or destroyers and frigates? Very, very carefully. This is one of the reasons why I don't think they were deployed as often as people try and think they were. I think they were a lot less deployed than people sometimes claim, because securing them was a nightmare. I'm just hearing someone outside, so I'll be back in a second. That's all out. Right then. So, John Luke, how would a preemptive strike on the Imperial German fleet at anchor just prior to World War I gone? Would minefields and outer defences have made it prohibitive? If not, was a strike considered? A strike was considered. It probably would have been costly, but wouldn't have been massively costly. But the thing is, they decided against it because they were trying to avoid a war that was coming. I have been hearing a lot of banging and noises lately coming from the direction of not that far away from where I live. So I'm thinking the construction of HDS Thunderchild is going along quite well. I expect to see her launch some point soon. Or that's what I'm putting noises down. Cargan, was there a place to exchange the a plan to exchange the 4.7-inch guns on the Tribals for a better dual-use mounting? And if there was, what was it? It was considered to replace them with the 4.5s, but in the end, they had the battle class coming into service, and as I had to write most of yesterday, which many of you will have known from my comments in Discord, was not really a happy experience for me. They got, basically, the British were saving money, and so they got rid of them instead. They would have cost a lot to get them working properly. In terms of, fix them up for peacetime use after their hard war use. So you want, which Japanese destroyer had 3 torpedo launchers plus partially? I think it was the Shiratsus, but I'm not 100% sure. Ian Carr, Congo was built in UK yard and sister ships in Japan. When people say that the Japanese ships were lightly built, does this mean that they had moved on from the Congo principles? To an extent, yes. To an extent, yes, but they're not as lightly built as, sometimes some people like to make out. Jeff Beeler, that is basically the problem. Fisher is not strong when it comes to light cruisers and small designs. Michelle Oates, when I retired in 97, USN nuke subs were still using steam distilling plants. Iran diesel subs were already using reverse osmosis distilling plants. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. Eric Anakin, sinking of D.D. Elliott was an eye-opener for many navies. What changes happened after that in regards to missiles, anti-missile warfare? Penguin was already in development, but nothing else. Lots of things happen. When it gets... You see, any time you have a sinking, it's like the Falklands War. The moment you have a major operation to draw from, or a circumstance happens, all the navies will pour over it and start looking at it. And I start looking at the variations of it, and what are they basing it in, and how active were the passive kills, happen with this, how active with that. Sheffield is a good example, because Sheffield happens, and it's the reason the captain and other people aren't held to blame is because of the circumstances of the technology around it, which hasn't been realised quite how much of an interference certain things are with the technology. So they then evolved them. But, it happens. Jeff Beeler, to fly the Corsair off its carriers, the Karen clipped his wingtips so it would fit in most hangars and used a curved landing approach to get around. Lots of things were done. Vigilant, Yamamoto was reported to be a big gambler. I guess he was not big enough one for the big risk operations. Yep. Yeah, they wanted a battle fleet. Harao wanted a battle fleet in the Solomon Islands. Harao wants lots of things. Harao is a great quarterback general. Basically, Harao is a okay-ish officer in actual operations, but when it comes to a Sunday night, So I'm trying to remember. One of my American pals came up with a great phrase the other day. He said, Friday night sofa quarterback. Yeah, that's what he is. He's a Friday night sofa quarterback. So, yeah. In-car, because Bismarck, Tirpitz, Sarnhorst got through the Kiel Canal. I think they could get through the Kiel Canal. That's one of the reasons why they had them built. Monday morning quarterback. Monday morning quarterback. So, yeah, sorry. I've forgotten it. Okay, that was better. Ian Sinclair, did the original blueprints of World War II ships still exist? Yes, they do. You can actually go find a lot in the Woolwich Arsenal archives, which is kept maintained as part of the Greenwich Naval Museums, or you can find some in the National Archives, and you can find some in various other archives around the country. Wirral Archives, the Tyne and Weir Archives. These archives all have them. I think Falmouth Archives as well. And I think there's some up in Glasgow as well. Sean Mack, most facepalm moment in naval history in your opinion? Oh, there's so many. Sean, that would be an entire video of facepalm moments, and by the end of it, I would have a very, very smacked face because I'd have probably got over excited at certain points and actually whacked my face. So yeah, there's so many. Carlos, back to RN ship refits in the US. Were part systems shipped from the UK to US yards to be installed there? Occasionally there were. Occasionally there were. You all wondered what the ships which were going, convoy ships which were going back to America were carrying. Well, occasionally they were carrying things like that. John Luke, how many Town class would it take to kill a Yamato class? Could 2 KGVs bring down a Yamato class also? Okay, so when's the attack? If you're attacking in daylight, I would want a fair number of Town class around the Yamato because it's going to have to be a torpedo kill. At night, slightly less, but it's still going to have to be a torpedo kill. 2 KGVs bring down a Yamato? Possibly. It wouldn't be easy going. They'd probably lost one of them, but maybe both of them. They would have succeeded. Basically, the KGVs by the end of World War II are fairly well built up. They've got a lot of radar, a lot of tech in them, which Yamato doesn't really have really that good of working versions of. So, yeah, KGVs would have an advantage. Ian Carr, what is your view regarding whether the British Pacific Fleet was wanted and were they treated as equals when they arrived off Okinawa? They were wanted by the USN who were there, not necessarily by some of the USN back in Washington. And when they arrived off Okinawa, they were very gratefully received because honestly you needed as many ships as many aircraft and as many things as you could get. So all help was gratefully received. And they did well off Okinawa. And remember, they're preparing for the invasion of Japan. None of these people really know there's going to be nuclear animals, and none of them know that the nuclear weapons are how successful they're going to be against Japan. So they're preparing for the invasion of Japan. So frankly, nicest way, you need the Brits. You need everyone you can get because the invasion of Japan is going to be massive and it's going to be costly. Ian Carr, Rodney had crates of spares on board for the refit when fighting Bismarck. Yeah, pretty much. I think Nelson also had crates of refits, crates of supplies aboard during D-Day, because pretty much D-Day happens on the 6th of June, and something like the 22nd of June, she's in America for her refit. So I do sometimes wonder if D-Day was in some ways dictated by when is HMS Nelson going to be free? Vision, when reading Captain Hara, I'm always thinking about how hindsight affects the books. People's memories change based on the end results. In war as in sports. Yes, and in painting himself in a good light. Vision, front porch admiral. That's me. Good one. Jack Straw, facepalm moment nominee. Halsey chases Oswald, then dives the Third Fleet into Typhoon. October-December 1944. Ooh, tempting. Vision, is a ship's captain the ultimate backseat driver? He's not at the wheel. Not normally, not quite, but they do get involved. Veterinary Summary, weird question, but what are your thoughts on the Dutch destroyers in the interwar early war period, such as the Gerard Calmer classes? Right, they're good ships. The Dutch do build good ships. I wouldn't. Let's put it this way: they make very good sense for the Dutch and the Dutch Navy's requirements and the size of the Dutch fleet. For a larger navy, I might not go with them, but for the Dutch, they are good ships and they're well balanced. I know the Royal Navy quite likes the few it gets to play around with, thanks to the Free Dutch. I do like them. Ken McGuire, fun to think about that, but I'm pretty sure D-Day was determined more by it being warm enough for amphibious warfare within a right move phase. Yeah, that's more likely the case, but it's fun to think it was down to HMS Nelson. Let's be honest, it's nice to think that Nelson was in charge of something, even indirectly through a namesake of to do with World War II. Right, it's 8:30, so any questions? Because, you know, I think I managed to catch up, so I'll say any questions. And if there aren't any, then I will say thank you, but I will first see if there's going to be any questions. Turning 3434, follow on. Friesland and Holland, not ASW destroyers. Holland was quite good. Right then. So, as always, to everyone, thank you very much for subscribing. Thank you very much for sharing. Thank you very much to everyone who's a patron. Thank you to everyone who's buying the book and all those sort of things. Thank you to everyone who's watching. So it's been lovely to have you, and I will answer the final questions before I go, but I just wanted to say, make sure I said the thank yous. So, how do you think the Indian Navy fleet is designed strategically from SPI? I think they're starting to get there, but they're always going to have a problem in that India is a triangle with two large coastlines and sit in the middle of the Indian Ocean. Where do you put your fleet, and how do you position it so you can cover both sides? Because if you're down here at this end of the triangle, then you can't support those borders, and you need to support those borders. But if you're up there, then you have a whole triangle bit you have to protect. So basically, you almost need 3 fleets. It's fun times. Right then. Thank you very much to the new person who's just subscribed. And Daniel Freeman, it's always a pleasure to have you here. It's a pleasure to have everyone. Thank you, Jack Ray. Thank you, Kurt Over. Best book on the Jutland. Probably it has to be Nicholas Jellicoe's book, but I'm not that enamored with that either. Most of the Jutland books are so busy trying to prove a point that I'm not sure quite what they actually get into. Thank you very much to King's Rook. Thanks Mitchell Oaks. Thanks Eric. Thanks Greg. Thanks Carl. Thanks Jay Richardson. Thanks Weeb Extraordinaire. Nathan A. Thank you. Stephen White. When you return to your students, how do you describe us? I haven't. When I return to students, I describe you as my favourite class. They're not too keen on that one. Jane with Dr. Clark. If Nelson was in charge, they would have navigated to the beaches more accurately. Yeah, probably. Martin Sims. What are we doing? What are we doing for the next 2.5 hours? I'm not sure. Have fun. Thank you, everyone, and take care. Good luck. The Royal Rooster. Follow-up question on nukes on minor warship. Was it easier to secure nukes on major warships? Yes. It's always easier. When you have more space and you can have a special magazine and stick them off and lock them away and keep them on the guard, it's safer. Rules of the game on Jutland is good. That is. Have fun. Thank you very much, Bichon. Thank you very much, Jeff. Thank you very much, Mike. Ian. Just take care, everyone. Have a nice evening. And thank you. Toodles.